The Red Death devastated the country for a long time. Such a terrifying and deadly disease never appeared in human history. Blood was its symbol and its mark, the redness and horror of blood. It caused sharp pains, sudden dizziness, and heavy bleeding, leading to death. The red stains on the victims' bodies, especially on their faces, made others avoid them, shutting them out from help and sympathy. The entire course of the disease, from start to finish, took only half an hour. But even under these conditions, Prince Prospero was happy. While his people were dying in pain because of the disease, he gathered 1,000 healthy and cheerful people from among his high-ranking officers, soldiers, and aristocrats and retreated to one of his fortified castle-like monasteries. This castle-like monastery was a huge and beautiful structure, reflecting the prince's own unique yet noble taste. The prince fortified this structure with strong, high walls and iron gates and placed countless soldiers watching the outside of the structure for 724 hours to prevent anyone from entering or leaving. The castle-like monastery was full of food, drinks, and every kind of item that they needed, and thanks to these precautions, they thought the disease could not affect them. Towards the end of the 5th or 6th month of their closure, while the disease was killing outside, Prince Prospero organized an extremely luxurious masked ball for his 1,000 friends. The prince arranged everything for their pleasure. There were jesters, storytellers, ballet dancers, and musicians. All of these were inside the walls along with safety. But on the outside, there was only the Red Death. But first, let me describe the rooms where it took place. There were 7 rooms, including an imperial suite. In many palaces, such suites form a long and straight hallway with the folding doors sliding back nearly to the walls on either side, allowing for an open view of the entire space. But here, the arrangement was very different, as might be expected from the prince's bizarre taste. The rooms were so irregularly arranged that only one could be seen at a time. A sharp turn occurred every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn created a new effect. In the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window overlooked a closed corridor. These windows were vitriol, and each one's colour was different according to the tone of the decoration of the room. For example, the room at the east end was painted blue, and the vitriol was a vibrant blue. The decorations and tapestries in the second room were purple, and the vitriol here was also purple. The third room was green throughout. The fourth room was decorated and lighted with orange. The fifth room was white. The sixth room was violet, and so were the vitriols. And the seventh room was very different from the other rooms. This black room looked so horrible that almost no one dared to enter it. The 7th room was black and was tightly decorated with black tapestries from ceiling to walls. Only in this room, the vitriol's colour didn't match with the decoration. In this room, the vitriol was scarlet, a deep blood colour. There were lamps and candlesticks among the presents of gold ornaments, and there was a giant ebony clock. During the clock struck midnight, this clock would make such a sound that everyone who heard this sound would freeze, and so it was. When the echoes of the clock filled the room, the musicians in the orchestra paused. So did the dancers, and there was a brief moment of annoyance among the guests. When the echoes stopped completely, laughter filled the masked ball and the fun resumed. But when the clock struck again in exactly 60 minutes later, the same disturbed atmosphere returned. The prince supervised the decoration of the 7 rooms for this great celebration, and it was the prince who decided on all the costumes that the guests would wear. These costumes were daring, sparkling, and fun. There were arabesque figures with mismatched colours and crazy fantasies like those fashioned by madmen. There was much beauty, wantonness, and bizarreness, but there was nothing that could arouse antipathy. Then the ebony clock in the black room struck again. Instantly, All fell silent, and the dreams froze for a while. But before the last echoes of the final bell faded into complete silence, many had time to recognize the presence of a masked figure that no single individual noticed until then. And the rumor of this new presence spread in whispers, and finally a buzz rose up from the whole community, first expressing disapproval and astonishment, and then horror, terror, and disgust. In such a community of absurdities, you might think that an ordinary appearance could not create such a sensation. In fact, the variety of costumes that could be worn on the night was almost limitless, but the figure went beyond the vague limits of freedom even for Prince Prospero, even for such a senseless and reckless society where life and death are equally a joke. Some subjects cannot be joked about. Indeed, the whole community seemed to feel deeply that there was neither intelligence nor morality in the stranger's costume. The figure was tall and skinny, covered from head to toe in grave clothes. He wore a mask that made it difficult to distinguish him from a corpse. Her dress was covered in blood, and her face was covered in horrific marks of the Red Death. The first moment Prince Prospero saw this terrifying figure, he froze with a strong fear, either of terror or disgust. But soon his face turned red with rage. "Who dares to mock our suffering?" said the prince angrily, and he gave the order to arrest him. Soldiers rushed into the crowd to catch the masked figure, but when they saw him up close, they became speechless. "Or will nobody follow my orders?" Prince shouted angrily again. Prince Prospero was standing in the blue room when he said these words echoed in all 7 rooms loudly, because the prince was a brave and strong man, and as soon as he gestured to the orchestra, the music poured. Unhindered, the masked figure began to move towards the prince. Everyone was so terrified that no one made a move towards the masked figure to stop him. The crowd withdrew in fear from the middle of the rooms to the walls. The masked figure moved uninterruptedly, but with serious and measured steps, from the blue room to the purple room, from purple to green, from green to orange, from there back to white, and even from there to violet. Prince Prospero was outraged, but also ashamed because of his own momentary cowardice. He quickly rushed through the 6 rooms. No one followed him because of the deadly terror that seized everyone. The prince reached the far end of the black room and came face to face with his enemy. He raised the dagger, and there was a sharp scream, and immediately afterwards, Prince Prospero fell to his knees and died, and everyone tasted the presence of the Red Death. He came like a thief in the night, and their victims dropped one by one with heavy bleeding in their mouths and full of